Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The scourge of anti-Semitism long preceded Zionism and indeed was a major factor in generating this movement when the visionary Theodor Herzl considered the implications of the Dreyfus Affair. But lately, both organizations and individuals objecting specific policies of certain Israeli governments have crossed a line to embrace Jewish hatred in all of its ugly forms. Jews around the world who have nothing to do with Israeli military operations, either defensive or offensive, are victimized as if their religion makes them synonymous with the Jewish state. How serious is this problem in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere? Joining us to discuss this matter from the Netherlands is Professor Uri Rosenthal, formerly the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. It's good to see you, Uri.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is Mr. Robert Silverman from elsewhere here in Jerusalem, formerly the President of the Foreign Service Association at the U.S. State Department and currently a lecturer at Shalem College. It's good to see you as well, sir.
Thank you.
And also with me here in the studio, of course, is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
You know, Jonathan, of course, there are many factors here, many reasons, but it seems as if the overriding problem is ignorance. And this ignorance is common to the new generation, millennials, Generation Z, whatever you want to call these cohorts of people who have been born a long time after the Holocaust, a long time after the State of Israel was established, only 3 short years after the Holocaust, and who have no memory of what Jews around the world, as well as in Israel, have undergone. And therefore, we see all of those superficial, simplistic expressions of bigotry, which are not exclusive to Jews, but for some reason, people with conspiratorial bent take to them. As, of course, it has also to do with social media and with several phenomena which may have started in the United States, but engulfed the Western and the formerly Eastern states of Europe too. And therefore, it would take a lot of efforts by educators, by opinion leaders, and political leaders as well, to try and work against the current. But it is quite possible that because the old generation is going out due to biology, the new generation would carry on this, whatever you call it, virus of anti-Semitism forward, unless there are radical ways of eradicating it.
Indeed. Well, I'd like to start with Professor Rosenthal. I had extensive conversations with intelligence officials and different individuals who are contending with combating anti-Semitism particularly, but also in broader sense, trying to manage or thwart ongoing efforts by foreign entities to sow disinformation for the purpose of inflaming certain publics. We see the largest contingent right now who are embroiled in so-called anti-Semitism happens to be the migrant populations in Europe, particularly originating from Islamic countries, and if I may say it openly, people who are feeling a relation, and Muslims who live in Europe or the United States, who are also very prone to disinformation emanating from totalitarian regimes in the Middle East, who are spending a lot of money in order to steer those emotions throughout the Western civilization. At the same time, you also see the fringes of both the radical right as well as the radical left partake in this. Nevertheless, we see those fringes, particularly on the left, growing quite exponentially. The younger the demographics are, unfortunately, what can you tell us from your line of sight. How do you interpret the current situation?
Let me first and foremost say that I do agree very much with what Amir Oren said. It reminds me actually of a kind of analogy to the fact that when, for instance, in my country and in other Western countries, the younger generation is being told, for instance, that we have a European Union for the very fact that this union was founded on the presumption that there should be no more war in Europe. These were stories of the past which actually don't hit the minds of the younger generation. And here, with regard to the Holocaust, we see actually the same. Looking at the picture right now, I would say that we see a annoying and disturbing mixture in many Western European countries of anti-Semitism coming from the left and indeed from the Muslim minority, which in many Western countries are more than 10% of the population. For instance, in my country, in the Netherlands, we have more than 1 million Muslims, and especially under the younger generation of the Muslims who are active on the streets and in the schools, we see despicable manifestations of anti-Semitism, for a large part simply because they don't know what they are talking about. And when you consider here the relation between being anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, when it is about Israel, the nuances are lost in this sort of debate. Then indeed Israel is for them the same as, let me call them, the ultra-right, who are very vocal, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich. And then it is very difficult actually also for a person like me to say, well, that is Israel. The nuances are lost, the subtleties are lost, the distinctions within the Israeli society and in the Israeli politics are lost. That is the picture we are in. And may I give you one terrible and despicable example of what we are going through in the Netherlands right now. After 80 years, at last, eventually, we had the solemn opening of the Holocaust Museum in Amsterdam last Sunday. And there, one of the guests of honor was Israeli President Herzl. There were protests against the arrival of President Herzl. That is okay. That demonstrations were allowed, okay, in a free country. But these demonstrations took place within vocal proximity of the Portuguese synagogue where this solemn opening took place. And when the people in the synagogue left the synagogue after the event, there were survivors of the Holocaust, hand in hand with their grandchildren, who were actually being harassed by horrific expressions of pure anti-Jewish hatred. There were slogans like, not only from the river to the sea, but also slogans like Juden raus, the German Nazi. That is the situation we have confronted in the Netherlands last Sunday, and the pictures have gone all over the world and should be a very fierce warning that we can't go on like that.
And if I may note, because I did go and follow the event, the remarks, of course, but also the protests, and saw who were outside protesting, the majority of them are not indigenous Dutch individuals who are calling for the Jews to leave, or Jodenraus, or whatever you want to refer to, but they were Muslim migrants, again, coming from the Middle East or North Africa, and have their sentiments. They are very prone to disinformation, and as such are very also violent, and are also an issue to be contended with law enforcement in the Netherlands. But nonetheless, unfortunately, this is not only a European problem. This problem is also in the United States, and for that, Mr. Silverman, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Jonathan. First, thank you for TV7 for hosting this important discussion on anti-Semitism, because October 7th was a very clarifying moment on world anti-Semitism for all of us. We saw people come out who, surprised the world in support of Hamas's brutality, of mass rape, massacre. And it surprised. I mean, the massacre itself was a surprise, but the reception of it in places like Western Europe and the United States was a second surprise for some of us. Now, I have worked for 3 years in the American Jewish Committee, one of the American organizations that does outreach to other communities in the United States. And I set up the first ever American Jewish outreach as a national organization to the American Muslim community. So let me discuss some of the takeaways there. Please. Because America is quite different than Europe. As Professor Rosenthal was saying, in places in Europe, the Muslim population is as much as 10% and growing because it's a young population. In the US, the Muslim population is 1%. And yet, it's been very successful in sort of magnifying its numbers through this concept called intersectionality, which is you bring in other minority groups to support your causes based on the fact that we're all oppressed groups. So that has been a successful tactic. And so in the US, you do see, just like in Europe, large audiences marching in support of Hamas. And in fact, just like Professor Rosenthal was saying, in front of synagogues, not in front of an Israeli consulate, not in front of some Israeli trade mission, but in front of, in places that are where Jews go, synagogues. So a couple clarifying thoughts. One is, I think we're well beyond now, as a result of October 7th, this idea that there are two separate things, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It's the same phenomenon, sadly. I mean, theoretically, you can imagine someone being opposed to the concept of a Jewish state who is not anti-Semitic. But the reality is the people who are attacking Israel are doing this in front of Jewish establishments. They're attacking Jews. They're not attacking Israelis. They're attacking Jews. So anti-Zionism has become synonymous, I believe. Now, I think that debate is over. I think the protest movement after October 7th settled that debate. And it's quite clear, as the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism states, that there are many cases in which anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. One. Two, I want to let people know who are watching this TV show, the Jews throughout the world, whether it's Europe, whether it's United States, or whether it's Israel, they've noticed who their friends are as a result of this. It is, again, a very clarifying moment. And the people who've come out in support of Jews and support Israel. That is being noticed, as well as the ones who don't. And in the United States, where there's been a big effort on alliance building over the years, it was quite recognized that in the largest ever gathering of American Jews that happened in November on the White House in the Washington, D.C., when you had 300,000 people, the one community in the United States that was unambiguously there was the American Christian groups came out in support. So that was noticed. Okay.
Mr.
Those are my
Oren?
2 points.
There can be no devil's advocate here, and there are no mitigating factors. But let me just tick off several facts which might clarify why there is sometimes a confusion. First of all, in several languages, or at least in the vernacular, there is this term Israelites, Bnei Israel, which means Jews. But even people such as General Dwight D. Eisenhower, before he became president, used this term without making any distinction. This was during the British mandate over Palestine. There was no state of Israel, but he didn't really understand the difference between American Jews or Jews around the world and people who are Jewish or Hebrew, Ivrim, in Palestine, who are going to be Israelis. So that's part.
Interesting, because in Turkey specifically, they say Yahudi wa Ibre. And the Ibre is for Jews living in Turkey, and Yehudi is actually Jews living in Israel. So they make that distinction as well.
Also, Israel, for all the right reasons, but nevertheless adding to the confusion, has a defense and security doctrine which includes Jewish communities around the world as being under its umbrella. If they are threatened, if they are hurt by mobs, Israel sees as its responsibility their protection, and sometimes even making them emigrate only to Israel, considering the Soviet Jews who wanted to leave the Soviet Union, but Israel insisted that they don't go anywhere but to Israel. So apparently, in the area of mass media and social media, some people can get confused by these facts.
Indeed. Well, Professor Rosenthal, I'd like to ask, because there are many issues in Europe which we usually discuss on Europa Stands. Nevertheless, in today's discussion, I'd like to focus on one issue of that, and that is authorities have a difficulty to contend with the format or the phenomena of anti-Semitism because there's still a lack of legal frameworks to deter those kind of acts. And that comes in spite of the fact that for years upon years, European governments have acted in efforts to protect Jews nonetheless. So where is the gap there, and what should happen in order to reestablish a certain deterrent to bring about the protection of the Jewish communities in Europe?
Jonathan, that is a incisive question, actually, and maybe I'm going a little bit. I'm a little bit dissociating from the question itself, but it actually I associate it with. It crosses my mind. We have a constitution where we have Article 1 being the anti-discrimination clause. And it simply crosses my mind at the moment that when the question about Article 1 of our constitution, anti-discrimination, is on the table, it's immediately not about discrimination against Jews, fighting anti-Semitism, but it is about this Muslim community, which considers itself to be in an inferior position and what have you. So, in a way, the fact that Jews were part and parcel and are part and parcel of the, for instance, the Dutch or the British society has all too long been taken for granted, in the sense that security and safety concerns were not at all relevant. If there were threats and menaces against the Jewish community or against synagogues, the first reaction of the government, I was in the midst of this discussion in the Netherlands over the years. For instance, in Amsterdam, it was told to the Jewish leaders that they should take care of their community themselves. Today, we are in a totally different position. The Jewish the synagogues, Jewish schools are actually being harassed and threatened. And suddenly, the government is understanding, and there is a growing awareness among the government leaders that they have really the first and foremost task to also protect the Jewish minority, not just those Muslims who are now in the country by over 1 million. So that is actually the situation we are in. Allow me to say something in the direction of Robert Silverman. It struck me very much that a very recent Gallup poll says that among the younger generation in the United States, and not only on the Democratic, but also on the GOP, Republican side, a large part of them is answering to the question, who is responsible for the Gaza war? They say, to my annoyance, Hamas is not the first to be blamed, but Israel. That's the situation we are in. I would say that in Europe, the record would not be different, even worse.
It's a rising number. They're still not the majority, though, and that is something that needs to be distinctive.
But the fact that there is a substantial group of young people who are affiliated to the Republican Party, I'm not talking Democrats, who indeed say to the question, who is the main responsible for the Gaza war, that they say Hamas first, only Israel second. That is quite a nasty observation, I would say.
Which is obviously also a lot worse in the Democratic Party. But nonetheless, I'd like to voice one point, and that is something that struck me when you noted the Article 1 about discrimination in the Netherlands in the Constitution. Naturally, it's very similar to the October 7th massacre. The initial attack occurred when the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates launched the onslaught on October 7th, brought about the really obscene images that came out of there. It's pictures that we will never forget, unfortunately. But nonetheless, now they're playing victim. And that is the same occurrence based on Article 1 about discrimination. So they'll attack the Jewish communities and then play victim and invoke those same articles that were in place for the other. Anyways, a line of thought, Mr. Silverman, I'd like to ask you particularly about one, you don't have very much time, 2 minutes. The United States, what can be done in order to enforce basically protective measures for the Jewish communities there? And secondly, not all Muslims are anti-Semitic. I need to put it out there. You see, even in Morocco, the king of Morocco is very ardent supporter of the Jewish community in Morocco. We see the same in other locations. So there is an ongoing effort also in the United Arab Emirates, in Bahrain, in the Abraham Accord countries, so to speak, and even Saudi Arabia in particular. What can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, first to what can be done. There's law enforcement measures, and there is already a backlash underway, both in the elections and the polls. We saw this, by the way, in the Netherlands. And Professor Rosenthal has written very well for that in the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune about the election or the plurality of this Geert, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Wilders, right? Wilders. So, yeah. I mean, people, the average citizen in the US, in Europe, is not too thrilled with some of this pro-Hamas activity, some of the thuggery that's going on, that it's well beyond just the Jewish community, by the way. And so we'll see how all this plays into the elections in the United States. But a lot of people are unhappy, and there are law enforcement measures. In the universities, this goes to the question of why so many young people support Hamas, because their professors do. And there are a number of U.S. universities who are now being investigated. Harvard, some of the most famous universities are being investigated under the Civil Rights Act of 1965 for anti-Semitism, fostering anti-Semitic environments. So this process of backlash has started. And I agree with Jonathan. We can't give up on outreach to the Muslim population, but I think we've learned a lot. We've learned who are our friends within that community and who are not our friends. And those who cannot condemn Hamas brutality and Hamas terrorism are not our friends.
Indeed. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Professor Rosenthal, Mr. Silverman, and Mr. Oren, of course. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.